9:15 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. 24 American strike fighters were returning to the USS Abraham Lincoln. This was not a routine recovery. Every pilot looked at their display and saw the same thing. Nothing. Their identification friend or foe systems were dead. In the world of modern aerial warfare, an aircraft without a digital signature is a ghost. To a carrier strike group, a ghost is a threat. The sky above the Strait of Hormuz was suddenly filled with 24 high-speed threats. Commander Elias Thorne sat in the cockpit of his F-18 Super Hornet. He looked at his wingman. The other jet was less than 50 feet away. On his digital map, that jet did not exist. Thorne checked his secondary systems. They were also blank. This was not a hardware failure. A hardware failure happens to one plane. This was a total digital blackout. The air was thick with heat and humidity. Below the jets, the water of the Gulf was a deep and heavy green. Small fishing boats moved slowly. They had no idea that $100 million of technology had just turned into a liability. Thorne keyed his radio. The controller on the carrier spoke first. The controller spoke, "Raven 1. This is Lincoln Control. Identify yourself immediately." Thorne responded, "Lincoln, this is Raven 1. My transponder is active, but I am not seeing a return. Check your master gate." The controller's voice was tight. "Raven 1, we have 24 unknown contacts on a direct bearing for the ship. We cannot verify your identity. Break north immediately." Thorne looked at his fuel gauge. He could not break north. He was 10 minutes from empty. He looked at the vast blue horizon. Somewhere out there, the ship was waiting. But the ship was now a predator. 100 miles away, inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the atmosphere was electric. Operators stared at blue icons that had suddenly turned yellow. Yellow meant unknown. In this part of the world, unknown usually meant hostile. The Aegis combat system was the most powerful defensive tool on the planet. It was designed to process thousands of targets and fire missiles before a human could even blink. Now, it was pointing its sensors at its own pilots. The tactical action officer shouted, "Clear the data link. Reset the gate. We cannot have 24 bogies in the landing pattern." His assistant replied, "Sir, the system will not reset. We are losing the entire air wing." At the same moment, the Iranian radar station at Bandar Abbas caught the surge. To the Iranian operators, the American planes had not disappeared. They had simply changed their electronic profile. It looked like a tactical deception. It looked like a strike package preparing to penetrate their airspace. The Iranian commander at Bandar Abbas did not wait for orders from Tehran. He looked at his duty officer. The commander spoke. "The Americans are masking their signatures. They are closing on our territorial waters. Scramble the alert birds." 2 F-4 Phantom jets ignited their engines. The roar shook the concrete of the hangar. These were older planes, but they were armed with live missiles. The pilots were veterans. They did not need a digital handshake to find a target. They only needed a direction. Major Reza Karimi sat in the lead Iranian jet. He closed his visor. He had spent years watching the Americans from a distance. Today, the distance was closing fast. He pushed the throttles forward. The heat from the engines distorted the air behind him. Inside the American cockpit, Thorne saw the first warning light. It was a radar spike. It was coming from the coast. Thorne spoke to his wingman. "Raven 2, we are being painted. Stay close. Do not deviate from the flight path." The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 9:22 in the morning. Over the Strait of Hormuz. The sky was crowded, but the digital world was empty. Commander Thorne looked at his tactical display again. It remained a field of dead gray. He could see his wingman, Lieutenant Miller, physically through the canopy, but his radar showed nothing but ghosting interference. The Iranian radar at Bandar Abbas was now locked on. Thorne's cockpit was a symphony of warning tones. The steady chirp of a search radar had transitioned into the high-pitched squeal of a fire control lock. Someone on the coast was preparing to fire. Thorne keyed his radio. "Lincoln Control, Raven 1. We are being painted by a land-based battery. Requesting status on the intercept." The response from the carrier was distorted. Raven, this is Lincoln. We have interference. Multiple unknown contacts launching from Bandar Abbas. Bearing 040. 40 miles and closing. Thorn gripped the stick. Confirm. Are those friendly or hostile? The controller's voice cracked. We cannot confirm. Our systems are classifying everything as hostile. Do not engage unless fired upon. 40 miles away, Major Reza Karimi leveled his F-4 Phantom at 15,000 feet. His radar screen was a mess of electronic noise, but he could see the clutter of the American formation. It was a massive group. He had never seen the Americans fly in such a tight, non-responsive formation. It looked like a wall of metal moving through the sky. Karimi spoke to his backseater. "Can you get a visual on the lead?" The backseater replied. "Negative. Too much haze. But they are not squawking. No identification. No response to our hails." Karimi adjusted his heading. "They are acting like invaders. We will close to 5 miles. If they cross the line, we execute." Back on the USS Abraham Lincoln, the Combat Information Center was descending into controlled chaos. The Aegis system, designed to protect the carrier from mass missile attacks, was automatically slaving the ship's surface-to-air missiles to the incoming ghosts. To the computer, it didn't matter that these were American jets. They lacked the encrypted handshake that proved they belonged. The captain of the Lincoln stood behind the radar consoles. "Talk to me. Why haven't we regained IFF?" The technician's hands flew across the keyboard. "Sir, the encryption keys are being rejected by the air wing. It is like the planes in the ship are speaking 2 different languages. The entire network is desynchronized." The captain looked at the main screen. The Iranian jets were now 30 miles out. His own jets were 20 miles from the ship. The two groups were on a collision course directly above the carrier's outer defense zone. The captain spoke. "Warn the Iranians on the guard channel. Tell them to stay clear of our recovery pattern." The communications officer shook his head. "Sir, the guard channel is flooded. It is just static. We cannot get a message out." In the cockpit of his Super Hornet, Thorn watched the distance close. 25 miles. In a jet, that is less than 2 minutes. He saw 2 dots on the horizon. They were small, black specks against the white haze of the morning sun. He knew those specks. They were the Iranians. Thorn spoke into the squadron net. "All Ravens, this is lead. Assume defensive spread. Keep your hands off the weapon switches. We are flying a needle here. Do not give them a reason to twitch." One of the younger pilots responded. "Lead, they have a lock on me. My system says I'm seconds from an impact." Thorn's voice was steady. "Hold your line. It is a bluff. It has to be a bluff." But as the Iranian Phantoms began to bank, dropping their noses to gain airspeed for an attack run, Thorn realized that a bluff only works if both sides know the rules. Right now, there were no rules. There was only the silence of the machines. 9:30 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln was a cavern of blue light and whispered tension. The Combat Information Center team watched the master tactical screen. Every operator was frozen. 24 yellow icons were moving steadily toward the center of the fleet. In the logic of the Aegis combat system, yellow meant unknown. But as the aircraft crossed the final defensive boundary, the system made a choice. The icons turned red. The ship's defense computer did not see pilots. It did not see friends. It saw radar cross-sections and high-velocity profiles. It saw a massed attack. The tactical action officer turned to the captain. "Sir, the system is recommending an engagement sequence. It is slaving the Sea Sparrow missiles to the nearest targets." The captain felt a cold weight in his chest. The nearest targets were his own men. Manual override. Do not fire. I want every launcher held in standby. We do not shoot until I give the word. "Sir," the officer responded, "if those are not our birds, we have less than 40 seconds before they are in a lethal launch window." "They are our birds," the captain said. "They are our birds," the captain said. His voice was firm, but his eyes stayed on the red icons. "They have to be. 6,000 feet above the water, the Iranian Phantoms were no longer just specks on a screen, they were physical realities. They were not flying a standard intercept. They were aggressive. They were diving toward the American formation. Inside the lead Iranian jet, the weapons officer watched his display. "Major Karimi, I have a solid track. The Americans are not responding to the digital warning. They are ignoring our presence." Major Karimi adjusted his oxygen mask. "They are arrogant. Or they are hiding something. We will cross their nose. We will force them to turn, or we will collide." The Iranian jets increased speed. They were moving at Mach 1.2. The sonic boom rippled across the water below like a thunderclap in the morning heat. Commander Thorne saw the Iranian lead jet banking. It was a high-gravity maneuver designed to intimidate. It was also a maneuver that put the two aircraft on a path to impact in less than 10 seconds. Thorne spoke into his radio. "Raven flight. This is lead. They are coming across the bow. Do not flinch. Do not break. If we break now, we lose the formation." The two groups were now less than 5 miles apart. In a fighter jet, 5 miles is a heartbeat. The digital world was still dead. The physical world was becoming very dangerous. Thorne watched the Iranian Phantom grow larger in his canopy. He could see the missiles under its wings. He could see the pilot's helmet. A voice came through Thorne's headset. It was not the carrier. It was a new signal. It was faint and filled with static. The voice spoke. "Unknown aircraft. You are entering a restricted zone. Identify or be engaged." The message was in English, but the accent was not American. It was not Iranian. Thorne looked at his sensors. A new contact had appeared on the very edge of his remaining infrared scan. It was not a jet. It was something else. It was moving too fast for any drone he had ever seen. The warning repeated. Identify or be engaged. The morning air was suddenly very cold. 9:38 in the morning. The Iranian coast. A land-based surface-to-air missile battery near the port of Jask had reached a state of full combat readiness. The radar operators did not care about the mysterious third-party signal. They only saw the massive signature of the American strike fighters. To their equipment, the Americans were flying in a classic attack profile. The battery commander spoke. "Targeting is confirmed. We have 24 locks. Permission to engage." The regional command center responded immediately. "Hold. The Americans have not crossed the 12-mile limit. We do not fire first, but keep the tracks hot." 9:41 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The atmosphere was suffocating. Every tactical display showed the ship was being illuminated by high-powered Iranian fire control radar. On the bridge, the captain stared at the sensor readout. The Iranian battery was not just watching. It was ready to kill. The tactical action officer spoke. "Sir, we are being painted by multiple SA-6 sites. We are being painted by multiple SA-6 sites. The Iranian Phantoms are now within 3 miles of our lead element. Our pilots are defenseless without their electronic countermeasures. If they fire, we will lose half the wing in the first 30 seconds. The captain spoke. "What is the status of our own rules of engagement?" The officer replied. "Under the current theater instructions, we have the right to self-defense. The system is asking for a weapons release authorization for the Sea Sparrows and the rolling airframe missiles. We are inside the lethal envelope." The captain looked at the clock. "Negative. We wait. If we fire, we start a war. If they fire, we finish it. But we do not go first." 9:44 in the morning, 6,000 feet over the water. Commander Thorne felt the vibration in his seat. It was the physical manifestation of the radar energy hitting his aircraft. His cockpit was a graveyard of dead electronics, but his survival instinct was screaming. The Iranian F-4 Phantoms were now so close. He could see the individual rivets on their fuselages. They were flying a dangerous box formation around his squadron, effectively herding the Americans toward the coast. Thorne looked to his left. Major Karimi, the Iranian-led pilot, was looking directly at him. The two men were less than 200 feet apart. At this distance, no computers were necessary. They could see each other's eyes. Thorne saw no hatred. He saw the same thing he felt. Professionalism mixed with a terrifying uncertainty. Thorn keyed his radio on the common guard frequency. He hoped the signal would punch through the interference. Thorn spoke. Iranian aircraft. This is Commander Thorn of the United States Navy. We are experiencing a total systems failure. We are not hostile. We are returning to our ship. Do not interfere with our flight path. There was only static for 5 seconds. Then, a voice broke through. Major Karimi spoke. Commander, this is Major Karimi. You are flying toward our sovereign territory with your weapons active. You are not responding to digital protocols. My orders are to protect my border. Turn your formation to the south, or we will be forced to act. Thorn gripped the throttles. Major, I cannot turn my formation. If I turn, I lose my visual on the ship, and my fuel state is critical. I am staying on this heading. The Iranian pilot did not respond. Instead, he pulled his jet into a sharp climb, rolling over Thorn's canopy in a classic thump maneuver. The wake turbulence rattled Thorn's Hornet, forcing him to fight the controls to stay level. Behind them, the second pair of Iranian jets began to arm their short-range missiles. The digital tone of a heat-seeking lock began to play in Thorn's ears. It was a sound he had heard in 100 simulations. But this was not a simulation. The situation was no longer about technology. It was about two men staring at each other across a narrow gap of air, waiting for the other to make a mistake. Thorn spoke to himself. Don't do it. Don't be the one. The coast was now only 15 miles away. The Iranian missile battery was seconds from its own point of no return. 9:46 in the morning. The edge of Iranian territorial waters. The situation was now a physical vice. Commander Thorn looked at his fuel display. The numbers were flashing amber. He was at bingo fuel. This meant he had exactly enough fuel to reach the deck of the carrier, and nothing more. If he stayed in the air for 5 more minutes, his engines would flame out. He would be a glider in a combat zone. Thorn keyed his radio. Raven flight. This is lead. We are at bingo. We are committed to the recovery. Ignore the locks. Maintain current heading and airspeed. Behind him, Lieutenant Miller's voice was strained. Lead. My radar warning receiver is solid. The land-based battery is in a terminal guidance mode. They are not painting us anymore. They are tracking for a launch. Thorn did not look at his instruments. He looked at Major Karimi's Phantom. The Iranian jet was still there. It was a dark shadow against the haze. 9:49 in the morning. Bandar Abbas Regional Command. The Iranian general stared at the wall map. The American formation was less than 12 miles from the coast. In his mind, there was no equipment failure. There was only a provocation. The general spoke. Major Karimi, you are authorized to use force if they cross the 12-mile limit. Do not let them penetrate our airspace. Protect the motherland. Inside the Iranian cockpit, Karimi felt the weight of the order. He looked at the American Hornet. He saw the pilot's head move. He saw the exhaustion in the way the American plane drifted slightly in the turbulence. Karimi spoke to his wingman. Arm your missiles. Select heat seekers. We will take the rear elements first if they do not turn in 60 seconds. The wingman responded. Acknowledged. Weapons are hot. I have a tone on the trailing Hornet. 9:52 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The tactical action officer was sweating. The air conditioning in the room was set to 60 degrees, but he was drenched. The 24 red icons were now entering the ship's inner defense circle. This was the point of no return. If the ship did not fire now, it could not stop a coordinated missile attack. The officer spoke. Captain, the Aegis system is in auto special mode. It is requesting final release. If we do not override in 10 seconds, the ship will begin firing interceptors at our own squadron. The captain looked at the screen. He saw the Iranian Phantoms closing from the north. He saw his own jets coming from the east. He saw the land-based radar from the west. It was a perfect storm of lethal intent. The captain spoke. Keep the override active. I will not shoot down my own pilots. The officer's voice rose. Sir, if they are not our pilots, the Lincoln is defenseless. We are betting the ship on a feeling. The captain gripped the rail of the command bridge. It is not a feeling. It is a command decision. Hold fire. In the sky, the distance to the 12-mile limit was now measured in hundreds of feet. Thorne could see the surf breaking on the Iranian shore. He could see the white buildings of a coastal village. Thorne spoke to his squadron. "Steady. Keep it steady." The Iranian wingman's finger rested on the launch button. He had a solid lock. The tone in his ear was a continuous, piercing scream. He was waiting for the word from Karimi. Then, the world changed. The digital silence was not broken by a voice. It was broken by a sound. It was a low-frequency pulse that vibrated through the airframes of every jet in the area. It was not a radio transmission. It was an electronic surge that bypassed the dead IFF systems. Every screen in every cockpit suddenly flickered to life, but they did not show radar data. They showed a single, scrolling line of text in 3 different languages. The text was clear. "Cease all hostilities. All systems are under external observation." The morning was about to reach its breaking point. 9:53 in the morning, 6,000 feet above the Strait of HORMUZ. The mysterious text on the cockpit displays did not stop the momentum of the crisis. It only added a layer of digital confusion to a kinetic reality. Commander Thorne ignored the scrolling message. He could not afford to look at a screen. He was watching the Iranian Phantom. The Iranian wingman pulled his nose up. He was now in a perfect high 6 position behind Lieutenant Miller's Super Hornet. This was the killing solution. The infrared seeker on the Iranian missile was staring directly into the heat of the American engine. The wingman spoke. "Major, I have a continuous tone. I am ready to fire." Major Karimi looked at the American lead. He saw Thorne's head turn. He saw the American pilot looking back. Karimi knew the rules of this game. If his wingman fired, the Americans would retaliate. Within seconds, 48 missiles would be in the air. Most of them would find a target. Karimi spoke. "Hold. Do not fire unless he breaks formation. If he stays level, we stay level." 9:54 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The automated defense systems reached their limit. The Aegis computer was designed to protect the lives of 5,000 sailors. It did not recognize the "Cease Hostilities" message on the screen. It only recognized that 24 red icons were now inside the 5-mile kill zone. The master computer issued a synthesized voice command. "Targeting solution confirmed. Battery release in 10 seconds." The tactical action officer screamed over the noise. "Override! Give me the manual override!" The technician was frantic. "The keyboard is locked. The external signal is jamming our internal command architecture. I cannot stop the launch sequence." The captain lunged for the physical kill switch on the weapons console. It was a guarded toggle. He flipped the red cover. His hand hovered over the switch. If he pulled it, he would disable the ship's ability to defend itself from any threat. If he didn't, he would watch his own aircraft vanish from the screen. 9:55 in the morning. The Iranian missile battery at Jask. The commander of the battery saw the American ship turn into the wind. This was the signal for a launch. To his eyes, the carrier was preparing to fire. He did not wait for the general at Bandar Abbas. He did not wait for the mysterious signal to explain itself. The battery commander spoke. "Launch. Fire 1. Fire 2. 2 solid-fuel rocket motors ignited on the coast. The sound was a roar that could be heard for miles. 2 SA-6 missiles accelerated into the sky. They left behind thick white plumes of smoke. They were traveling at Mach 2.8. They were slave to the lead American aircraft. Commander Thorne saw the flashes on the coast. He saw the smoke trails. His heart hammered against his ribs. Thorne spoke into the radio. "Breakers! Breakers! Missiles in the air! Go defensive! Break left! Break left!" The American formation shattered. 24 jets banked hard into the sun. Chaff and flare dispensers fired automatically. The sky was suddenly filled with burning magnesium and clouds of aluminum foil. 9:56 in the morning. The point of impact. The Iranian Phantoms were caught in the middle. They were too close to the Americans to escape the confusion. Major Karimi saw the missiles coming. He saw the American Hornet rolling toward him. He had 2 choices. He could fire his own weapons in a final act of defiance, or he could try to survive. He chose to survive. He pulled his stick into his stomach. The gravity pushed him into his seat. 8 Gs. 9 Gs. His vision began to tunnel into blackness. On the USS Abraham Lincoln, the captain pulled the kill switch. The ship went dark. The hum of the radar stopped. The screens went black. But the missiles from the coast were already in the terminal phase. They did not need the ship's radar anymore. They were looking for the biggest metal object in the sky. Thorne saw the lead missile. It was a white blur. It was coming for him. He pulled his jet into a vertical climb. He felt the airframe groan. He was at the absolute limit of the machine. The missile passed beneath his cockpit. He felt the shockwave. It was a physical punch that rattled his teeth. 9:57 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The 2 SA-6 missiles were less than 3 seconds from the lead American aircraft. Commander Thorne saw the proximity fuse light on his console flicker. He braced for the impact. He waited for the flash that would end his life. Instead, the sky changed. The 2 missiles did not explode. They did not lose their track. Their rocket motors simply stopped. The white smoke trails vanished as the engines cut out simultaneously. The missiles, still traveling at twice the speed of sound, lost their aerodynamic stability. They tumbled forward, catching the air like dead weight, and plunged into the green water of the Gulf. 2 small splashes marked the end of the immediate threat. Thorne leveled his wings. He was breathing hard. His cockpit was silent. Thorne leveled his wings. He was breathing hard. His cockpit was silent. The radar warning receiver had stopped screaming. Every light on his instrument panel had turned a soft, pulsing green. Behind him, Lieutenant Miller's voice came through with perfect clarity. "Lead. Did you see that? They just quit." Thorne looked to his left. Major Karimi's Iranian Phantom was still there, but it was no longer aggressive. The Iranian jet had pulled back to a neutral position. Its landing gear was cycling down and up, uncontrolled. The voice from the mysterious third-party signal returned. It was no longer filled with static. It sounded like a digital reconstruction of a human voice. It was calm. It was authoritative. The voice spoke. "All combatants, your weapons are now disabled. Your propulsion systems are under a temporary safety limit. Maintain your current altitude and heading. Do not attempt to re-engage." Thorne checked his throttles. They were locked at 60%. He could not increase speed. He could not slow down. He was a passenger in his own jet. Below them, on the surface of the water, the chaos was even more profound. The USS Abraham Lincoln had regained its power, but it was not the ship's crew who were in control. The massive rudders were moving on their own. The carrier was turning away from the Iranian coast, moving back into international waters with a precision that no human pilot could manage. In the Combat Information Center, the captain stared at his master screen. The red icons were gone. The yellow icons were gone. Every aircraft in the sky was now marked with a white circle. The word neutral was written under every single one. The tactical action officer looked at his hands. "Sir, I am not touching the controls. The ship is navigating itself." The captain didn't answer. He was looking at the communication log. A data packet had been received by the ship's mainframe. It was not encrypted. It was an open file, a note before continuing. "This is a fictional military scenario, created for narrative and analytical purposes only. It does not depict real events, real operations, or classified information." Inside the Iranian command center at Bandar Abbas, the situation was identical. The general watched as his missile batteries powered down. The screens did not go black. They showed the position of every American ship and every Iranian aircraft. They showed the fuel levels. They showed the intent. It was as if a giant hand had reached down and separated 2 children in a sandbox. Major Karimi spoke into the radio. He was no longer talking to his wingman. He was talking to the sky. "Who is this? Identify yourself." The voice responded. "Identification is irrelevant. You were seconds from a conflict that would have killed thousands. That outcome has been deleted. You will now return to your bases. The digital blackout will be lifted once all aircraft are on the ground." Thorne looked at Karimi. The Iranian pilot looked back. For the first time in 30 minutes, the fear was gone. It was replaced by a deep, unsettling wonder. They were both elite pilots, the best their nations had to offer, and they had both been rendered completely helpless. The sky over the Persian Gulf was a brilliant, empty blue. The heat remained, but the tension had shattered. Thorn keyed his radio. Raven flight. Follow the heading. We are going home. The Iranian Phantoms began a slow, synchronized turn to the north. The American Hornets turned south. They moved apart like the pieces of a puzzle being disassembled. 9:59 in the morning. The edge of the Iranian air defense zone. The sky was unnervingly quiet. Commander Thorn watched his hands. They were resting lightly on the control stick, but the stick was moving on its own. The Super Hornet was flying a perfect, stabilized exit from the combat box. To his left, the Iranian Phantoms were doing the same. It was a synchronized ballet of machines that had been stripped of their human intent. Thorn looked at his digital display. The scrolling text was gone. In its place was a high-resolution map of the entire Gulf. It showed every civilian tanker, every fishing boat, and every military asset. It was a level of situational awareness that should have been impossible. No single satellite or radar installation could produce this much data. Thorn keyed his radio. He didn't use a call sign. He just spoke. Major Karimi, do you still have control of your aircraft? There was a long pause. When the response came, Karimi's voice was hollow. Negative, Commander. My flight surfaces are locked. My engines are being managed by an external source. My weapons are disabled. Thorn looked at his wingman, Lieutenant Miller. Miller was staring out of his canopy, his hands held up to show he wasn't touching anything. The two American jets and the two Iranian jets were flying in a perfect diamond formation. They were no longer enemies. They were a single unit, under a single unknown command. 10:02 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The technical teams were in a state of shock. They had spent the last 3 minutes trying to regain control of the ship's mainframe. Every attempt was met with a polite but firm digital rejection. The ship's fire control systems were not just jammed, they were rewritten. The cyber warfare officer spoke to the captain. Sir, this is not a hack. A hack leaves traces. This is as if our entire operating system was replaced by something 10 generations more advanced. It bypassed the 12-layer encryption in less than a microsecond. The captain looked at the master screen. Is it the Iranians? Did they develop a localized pulse that we didn't project? The officer shook his head. No. Sir, we are monitoring the Iranian communications at Bandar Abbas. They are having the same crisis. They think we did it to them. They are accusing us of using a weather control weapon or a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. The captain leaned over the chart table. If it is not us, and it is not them, then who is holding the leash? The officer hesitated. The signal originated from a point in the middle of the Gulf. But there is nothing there. No ships, no platforms, just open water. 10:05 in the morning. Bandar Abbas Regional Command. The Iranian general was on a secure line with Tehran. He was shouting, "The Americans have paralyzed our entire coastal defense. My missiles are paperweights. My pilots are being flown like kites. We must prepare a retaliatory strike with our land-based ballistic missiles." The voice on the other end was cold. "You will do nothing, General. We have just received word from the Ministry of Communications. Our underwater fiber optic cables have been intercepted. Every television station in the capital is broadcasting the same message the pilots are seeing in their cockpits. This is not a military action. This is a global intervention." The general looked at his screens. The white circles on the radar were now moving with purpose. The American carrier group was moving south at 30 knots. The Iranian jets were approaching the runway at Bandar Abbas. The separation was being enforced with mathematical precision. Inside his cockpit, Commander Thorn saw the blue water of the Gulf slip away. Beneath him, he was being guided toward the recovery pattern of the Lincoln. The silence in his headset was heavy. He realized then that the mystery was not about who had stopped the war. It was about why they had chosen this specific moment to reveal themselves. The IFF failure had been a trap. It was a test of human restraint, and both sides had failed that test. They had both reached for the trigger. Thorne spoke to Miller. "Miller, check your data link. Is there any change?" Miller's voice was quiet. "Lead. I'm looking at the sensor feed, the source of the signal." Thorne looked at his map. The point of origin was no longer stationary. It was moving toward the center of the American fleet at 300 miles per hour, and it was underwater. 10:10 in the morning. The central Persian Gulf. The pressure on the control stick changed. It was subtle at first. The rigid, motorized resistance that had governed the flight of the Super Hornet began to soften. Commander Thorne felt the mechanical slop return to the controls. The aircraft was no longer a puppet, it was a machine again. Thorne keyed his radio. "Miller, I have manual control. Check your hydraulics." Miller's voice was shaky but clear. "Lead. I have it. The autopilot is disengaged. All systems are showing amber, but I am flying the jet." Thorne looked to his left. The Iranian diamond formation was breaking up. Major Karimi had pulled his Phantom 500 meters away, creating a safe buffer zone. The two groups of aircraft were now separated by a mile of open air. The digital map on Thorne's display flickered once and then returned to its standard tactical view. The neutral icons vanished. The yellow unknown icons returned. But the mood in the cockpit had changed. The panic of the IFF failure had been replaced by a heavy, professional silence. 10:15 in the morning. Thorne looked toward the Iranian Phantoms. He knew the protocol. Without digital identification, they were still technically hostile. But he also knew what he had seen. He had seen two missiles intended for him fall harmlessly into the sea. He had seen an adversary choose to hold his fire when he had the advantage. Thorne tilted his aircraft. He performed a slow, deliberate wing rock. It was the oldest signal in aviation. It was a sign of recognition. In the Iranian cockpit, Major Karimi saw the American gesture. He did not hesitate. It was a sign of non-hostility. He mirrored the move, dipping his heavy wings to the left and then the right. Karimi spoke into the radio. "Commander Thorne, my fuel state is critical. I am departing for Bandar Abbas. We will not follow." Thorne responded, "Copy that, Major. We are heading for the boat. Safe flight." There was no talk of politics. There was no mention of the mysterious signal. There was only the shared relief of two professionals who had looked into the abyss and stepped back. 10:20 in the morning. The USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier was no longer steering itself. The bridge crew had regained control of the helm and the engines. The tactical action officer reported that the Aegis system was back in standby mode. The ghost signal that had taken over the ship's mainframe had vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The captain stood on the bridge wing, watching the horizon through his binoculars. He saw the first two Super Hornets appear as tiny specks in the distance. They were flying low. "Conserve fuel profiles." The captain spoke to the air boss. "Start the recovery. I want every bird on the deck in the next 15 minutes. No bolters, no wave-offs. We are bringing them all home." The air boss responded, "Sir, we still don't have a reliable IFF handshake. The system is still buggy." The captain lowered his binoculars. "It doesn't matter. Look at them. They are flying like they want to land. Use the optical landing system. If they catch a wire, they are ours." On the flight deck, the yellow-shirted handlers moved into position. The crash and rescue team stood by. The hum of the ship returned to its familiar, rhythmic pace. But the tension in the air was different. The sailors were looking at the sky, not at their screens. They were looking for the physical proof that their air wing still existed. Thorne lined up for the final approach. He saw the massive silhouette of the Lincoln. It looked like a floating city of steel. He ignored his digital heads-up display. He focused on the meatball, the optical light on the side of the deck that guided his glide path. He felt the wheels touch the deck. He felt the brutal, familiar jerk of the tailhook catching the 3-wire. The jet slammed to a halt. Thorne exhaled, a long, slow breath that emptied his lungs. The canopy slid back. The hot, humid air of the Gulf rushed in. It smelled of jet fuel and salt water. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever smelled. The crisis had resolved. The missiles had stayed in their tubes, but as Thorne climbed down the ladder, he looked at his maintenance chief. The chief was staring at the tail of the jet. The chief spoke. "Commander, you need to see this." On the vertical stabilizer of the Hornet, where the squadron insignia should have been, there was a faint, scorched mark. It was a series of geometric lines that had been burned into the paint. It was not a lightning strike. It was a signature. The morning was over. The investigation was just beginning. 10:25 in the morning. The flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln was a scene of controlled, high-speed exhaustion. The last of the 24 Super Hornets, Raven 12, was on short final. The pilot was fighting the crosswinds, and the residual adrenaline of a near-death encounter. Below him, the arresting gear cables were stretched across the deck like tripwires. The yellow shirts watched the approach with a focus that ignored the heat and the noise. The LSO, the landing signal officer, stood on his platform. He watched the glide path of the jet. He didn't look at his computer. He looked at the aircraft. The LSO spoke into the radio. "Power, power, you are a little low. Keep it coming." The jet roared over the fantail. It slammed onto the deck, the tailhook snatching the 3-wire with a violent metallic snap. The engines went to full power for a split second, a safety measure in case the wire broke, and then died down to a low, whistling idle. The recovery was complete. Every American pilot was on the deck. 10:28 in the morning. Bandar Abbas Air Base, Iran. Major Karimi guided his 4 Phantom toward the runway. His fuel light was no longer amber. It was a steady, dying red. He felt the heavy thud of his landing gear locking into place. He looked at his wingman, who was trailing 1,000 meters behind. They were both low on energy, both physically and mechanically. The Iranian controller's voice was professional. There was no more shouting. "Eagle 1, you are cleared to land. Runway 22. Emergency vehicles are standing by." Karimi spoke. "Copy. Runway 22. We do not require assistance. We are intact." The Phantom touched down. The drag chute deployed behind the tail, a white bloom of fabric that slowed the heavy jet on the hot asphalt. Karimi steered the aircraft toward the hardened shelters. He saw the ground crews running toward him. He saw the security teams in their armored vehicles. But he also saw the sky. It was empty. The ghosts were gone. 10:30 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The master tactical screen flickered once. The white circles, the neutral designations disappeared. In their place, the standard blue icons for the American squadron and the green icons for the Iranian ground stations returned. The IFF handshake was restored. The encryption keys were verified. The digital world had returned to its proper alignment. The tactical action officer looked at the captain. "Sir, systems are 100%. The interference has completely dissipated. We have full command of the Aegis suite." He was looking at a printout of the geometric mark found on Commander Thorne's aircraft. It was a pattern of 6 interlocking circles, perfectly etched into the radar-absorbent coating of the tail. It looked like a mathematical proof. The captain spoke. "The wall of silence is gone. But I want a full diagnostic on every server. I want to know if they left anything behind." The officer nodded. "The intelligence teams are already on it, sir. We are also receiving a data burst from the Iranian side. They are requesting a formal inquiry into the unauthorized electronic intrusion of their airspace." The captain allowed himself a grim smile. "Of course they are. They have to save face. But they saw what we saw. They know that neither of us was in charge for those 10 minutes. The bridge of the carrier was quiet now. The heavy vibration of the engines was a comforting, familiar sensation. The crisis had resolved. The missiles had not flown. The war that had been seconds away had been canceled by a force that neither superpower understood. Commander Thorne walked across the flight deck. He felt the weight of his flight suit. He felt the salt on his skin. He looked toward the Iranian coast, hidden now behind the haze of the horizon. He thought of Major Karimi. He wondered if the Iranian pilot was also standing on a piece of concrete, looking south, asking the same questions. The morning was over. The tactical danger had passed. But the strategic reality of the Persian Gulf had been altered forever. The machines had failed, the humans had nearly faltered, and something else had stepped into the gap. 4:30 in the afternoon, 6 hours after the final recovery on the USS Abraham Lincoln, the captain's sea cabin was crowded with intelligence officers and senior engineers. Commander Thorne stood by the window, looking out at the wake of the carrier. He still wore his flight suit, the fabric stiff with dried salt and sweat. On the table between them was a high-resolution photograph of the tail section of his aircraft. The chief intelligence officer pointed to the interlocking circles etched into the metal. "We have analyzed the composition of the mark. It is not a burn. It is not a chemical reaction. The molecular structure of the radar-absorbent coating has been rearranged at a subatomic level. It is as if someone rewrote the physics of the paint." The captain leaned forward. "And the data logs? What did the black box record during the blackout?" The lead engineer shook his head. "Nothing, sir. The solid-state drives show a gap of exactly 12 minutes and 42 seconds. To the computer, those 12 minutes do not exist. But the external sensors, the ones that are not part of the main network, recorded a massive surge of localized gravity, not electromagnetic energy. Gravity." The room went silent. In the world of military science, a gravity-based weapon was a theoretical impossibility. It required an energy source larger than a nuclear reactor, condensed into a space smaller than a suitcase. Thorne spoke for the first time. "It wasn't a weapon. If they wanted us dead, we would be at the bottom of the Gulf. Those missiles were moving at 3 times the speed of sound. They stopped in mid-air. That wasn't an attack. It was a correction." The captain looked at Thorne. "A correction?" "Yes, sir," Thorne said. "We were about to start a war over a sensor error. Someone, or something, decided that was a mistake they couldn't allow. They didn't just jam us. They took the keys to the car because we weren't fit to drive." 8 o'clock in the evening. Bandar Abbas, Iran. Major Karimi sat in a small, windowless room. Across from him, 2 men in civilian clothes watched him with unblinking eyes. They had asked him the same questions for 4 hours. Had he coordinated with the American pilot? Karimi looked at his hands. They were steady now. "I told you." The American rocked his wings. "It is a pilot's signal. I returned it because it was the only thing left that made sense. Our radars were dead. Our missiles were dead. The only thing real in that sky was another man who didn't want to die for a ghost on a screen." One of the men leaned forward. "The Americans have a new technology. They have found a way to hijack our systems. You were a witness to a demonstration of their power." Karimi shook his head slowly. "No. Whatever happened today, it scared them as much as it scared us. I saw the American's face. He was not a conqueror. He was a survivor." The men in civilian clothes exchanged a look. They had heard the reports from the naval commanders. The truth was far more terrifying than a new American weapon. It was the realization that the Persian Gulf, the most contested strip of water on the planet, was no longer under human control. 10 o'clock at night. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The Secretary of Defense sat at the head of a long mahogany table. On the screen was a map of the Gulf, frozen at the moment of the peak crisis. The 24 red icons were clustered in a tight group. The Iranian Phantoms were hovering like shadows. A strategic analyst spoke. "The data suggests a localized intervention by a non-state actor, with technology that exceeds our current projections by at least a century. It was targeted, non-lethal, and highly sophisticated." The secretary rubbed his eyes. "So, we have a third party in the Gulf. Someone who can turn off a carrier strike group like a light bulb. What is the official narrative?" The analyst looked down at his notes. "The official narrative is a massive solar flare caused atmospheric ionization, leading to a temporary failure of IFF and communication systems. Both sides exercised commendable restraint." "And the Iranians?" the secretary asked. "They are saying the same thing," the analyst replied. "A natural phenomenon." The secretary nodded. "A lie of convenience. For now." But history shifted today. We have spent 50 years preparing for a war with a human enemy. 3 days later, the aftermath had only begun to settle. 3 days later, 1:45 in the afternoon. The USS Abraham Lincoln moved through the North Arabian Sea, leaving the Strait of Hormuz behind. The deck was busy with routine operations, but the energy had shifted. The geometric marks on the tail of Commander Thorne's Hornet had been covered with a fresh coat of gray paint. To the casual observer, the jet looked like any other, but the pilots who had flown that morning knew better. Strategic analysts in Washington and Tehran were already calling it the silent crisis. In the classified briefings, it was described as a total systemic failure of regional command and control. The official report would eventually blame a rare combination of solar activity and high-altitude atmospheric interference. It was a lie that served both sides. It allowed the world to keep turning without acknowledging that the most advanced weapons on Earth had been neutralized by a ghost. Inside the ready room, Commander Thorne sat with a cup of coffee. He was looking at a satellite image of Bandar Abbas. The Iranian base looked peaceful. He knew that, somewhere on that tarmac, Major Karimi was likely doing the same thing. They were two men who had shared a moment of absolute powerlessness. Thorne realized that the technology they relied on, the sensors, the links, the automated defense systems, was a fragile layer of glass. When it shattered, the only thing left was the human element, the wing rock, the eye contact, the decision to trust a man who was supposed to be a target. The strategic assessment was clear. Modern warfare had become so fast and so digital that it had outpaced the human ability to intervene. The Aegis system and the Iranian missile batteries were programmed to react in milliseconds. Without the mysterious intervention, the machines would have started a war that no human actually wanted. In the final analysis, the victory belonged to no one. The Americans had not dominated. The Iranians had not defended. Both had been saved from their own machines. The mystery remained. The source of the signal, the gravity surge, and the geometric marks were now the most closely guarded secrets in military history. Intelligence agencies were already shifting their budgets from traditional threats to something they called third-party mitigation. They were no longer looking for Russian submarines or Chinese satellites. They were looking for the force that had the power to stop a carrier strike group with a single line of text. The sky over the Persian Gulf was clear and bright. The heat continued to bake the water. Below the surface, the deep green depths held their secrets. Whatever had watched the two nations move toward the edge was still there. It had proven that the most advanced weapons can be stopped by something neither side controls. It had demonstrated that in the age of the machine, the human pilot is not the primary actor, but the last line of defense against a total catastrophe. The silence of the machines was not a failure, it was a warning, and whatever is watching is not finished.